Welcome back to the deep dive. You know that feeling, that deep structural tension that seems to just, permeate your entire existence?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Maybe it's that persistent knot in your lower back, the one a massage helps, but only for, a day?
Or that clench in your gut that feels almost constant, like it's just part of who you are.
Right. And it's not just bad posture, is it? It feels deeper, like it's tied to emotions, maybe, history.
Exactly. We're talking about stress that isn't just a fleeting thought, It's like it gets baked into your physical blueprint, a structural pattern that sticks around long after whatever caused it is gone.
Okay, so that's our mission today then, to really dig into this.
That's the plan, a deep structural investigation into this whole phenomenon. We want to understand why these holding patterns get so wired in, and crucially, can we actually do something about it? Can we, reprogram the body's default settings away from chronic defense?
Okay, let's unpack this. Our source stack today looks, pretty dense. Yeah. Fascinating stuff, though. It spans almost a whole century of thinking about this.
It really does. We're trying to connect some dots here. From Wilhelm Reich's psychoanalysis back in the day, his whole idea of character armor, all the way up to modern neuroscience.
Things like Polyvagal Theory.
Exactly, Polyvagal Theory, and also what we're learning about the cerebellum's role. And this is critical. The actual biological material involved the fascia.
Fascia, right. That connective tissue.
Yeah, it's turning out to be super important.
So the core question, the real hinge of this deep dive, is getting beyond just temporary relief, right? Like a stretch feels good, but the tension comes back.
Precisely. We want lasting change. Why does that chronic tension keep returning? And how do we actually achieve deep structural reprogramming? Something that addresses the roots, emotional, social, nervous system, all of it.
If we can map the source,
then maybe we can redesign the structure. That's the hope.
Okay, so to lay this foundation, we really have to start back in the 1930s with Wilhelm Reich. He was quite the figure, wasn't he? A student of Freud, but really controversial.
Oh, definitely. Brilliant, but controversial. He insisted that the body held the emotional truth that the mind often tried to, suppress or ignore.
And he coined the term that's foundational for our whole discussion today, body armor, or character armor. What exactly did he mean by that? Was it just muscle tension?
It was more specific than just general tension. Reich defined character armor as the physical counterpart to our psychological defense mechanisms. He saw it as the sum total of all those typical chronic muscle tensions we develop.
Unconsciously, right?
Totally unconsciously. To wall ourselves off, protect ourselves from feelings or impulses that felt unsafe or unacceptable or just too intense based on our upbringing or environment. It's like a frozen history of our emotional conflicts held in the muscles.
Wow. So it's not just random stiffness from sleeping weirdly. It's an active, though unconscious kind of self-censoring, a shield against feeling things?
Precisely. A living shield. Yeah. And Reich really dug into where this armor comes from. He pointed squarely at emotional suppression.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Think about it. What happens when really powerful emotions, anger, fear, deep grief, even spontaneous joy, are blocked over and over again, especially starting in childhood?
You learn not to show them, I guess.
Right. And the body literally carries out that suppression order. Those impulses, the energy of the emotion, they don't just vanish, they get stored as chronic muscular contractions designed specifically to hold that feeling back.
He gave some really visceral examples, didn't he? I remember reading about the child told, don't cry or don't talk back.
Exactly. What happens? Chronically tightening the throat, maybe the upper chest, the diaphragm locks up.
Yeah.
Anything to stop the tears or the words from physically escaping.
Or holding back anger, that clenched jaw, the tight shoulders pulled up towards the ears.
That's the mechanism. And over time, these little contractions, these micro holdings, they become completely automatic. They operate way below our conscious radar.
Until suddenly you notice, wow, my jaw is always tight.
Exactly. You become aware of that low-level persistent bracing. But Reich didn't just stop at individual psychology. This is really key for where we're going next. He linked this armor directly to social and cultural conditioning.
Okay. This is where his work got really radical and maybe why he was so controversial.
Absolutely. He argued that certain kinds of cultures, particularly ones demanding strict conformity, maybe authoritarian ones, or ones he described as sex negative, they actually condition people to internalize social control as physical rigidity, as body armor.
So the rules of society literally get embedded in your muscles.
That was his argument. The body becomes the place where social control is enforced. He had this famous line, Something like, the armored body is the somatic expression of man's alienation from his biological core.
Meaning our natural spontaneity, our vitality.
Gets choked off, inhibited. Because the social structure needs us to be predictable, controlled, maybe even a little numb, compliant.
It really reflects that mind-body split we hear so much about. The armored person is kind of operating from the neck up, disconnected from their feelings.
Yeah, and it can manifest in different ways. Maybe rigidity, shallow breathing, maybe emotional flatness, or the opposite, like an exaggerated forced control over every little reaction.
And he didn't just talk about this conceptually, he actually tried to map it structurally on the body, right? These segments.
Yes, he did. He described the armor as existing in 7 segmented bands horizontally across the body. Each segment, he thought, corresponded to different layers of defense and different kinds of repressed emotional energy.
Can you walk us through a few of those, especially the ones that seem most relevant to the kind of chronic tension people complain about today?
Sure. Well, the upper ones, the eyes, the ocular segment, and the mouth jaw, the oral segment, he linked those often to holding back, crying, or screaming, or shouting. Makes sense, right?
Totally. And the neck.
The neck is crucial, holding back rage, other strong emotional expressions. But maybe the most significant ones for modern chronic stress are the next 3 down: the chest, the diaphragm, and the abdomen.
Okay, let's break those down. The chest segment first. What's held there?
The chest segment covers a lot of shoulders, the collarbones, shoulder blades, even the arms. Reich believed this band tends to hold tension related to self-assertion, reaching out for things, but also holding back longing or grief.
So if you're constantly feeling like you have to brace yourself, defend yourself, or strive really hard,
that area contracts. It tightens up.
Yeah.
Then there's the diaphragm segment. This might be the most impactful, emotional.
This controls breathing.
Exactly. This big muscular ring is our primary breathing muscle. Reich thought it tends to hold really deep-seated fear, anxiety, maybe profound grief. When we brace against a shock or bad news, what's the first thing we do?
Hold your breath, right? Or gasp.
Right. The diaphragm locks up. And if that becomes chronic, it severely limits our ability to breathe fully and, by extension, to feel fully. It dampens everything down.
So if you, the listener, feel that constant tightness right around your solar plexus, that's not just a random physical thing. Reich would say that's your body physically holding back deep fear or anxiety.
That's how he'd interpret it, yes. The tension is literally a physical memory, maybe holding back a scream or that gasp from a shock, frozen in time.
Wow. Okay. And the abdominal segment below that?
He often linked that to holding back anger, more hostile impulses, the desire to lash out, maybe reject something or someone, gut feelings, literally.
So all this subtle, persistent tension we feel, the bracing, the tightness, Reich saw it as the physical residue of all these emotional and social defenses operating in layers throughout our body.
That's the core idea of character armor.
That structural map is such a crucial bridge, because if the armor is linked to social control, like Reich suggested, then we absolutely have to look at what that social control looks like now in the 21st century.
Exactly. That's the critical next step. Reich's insights were, well, profound for his time, but the specific pressures we face have evolved. We need to validate that insight you might be having, listener, that deep connection between your tension and these bigger societal forces, especially things like economics and hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself asking that all the time. Is this knot in my shoulder just me, my psychology? Or is my body intelligently responding to an environment that feels fundamentally insecure? The idea that tension reflects structural pressure, especially around money, precarity, it feels almost inescapable sometimes.
And you're tapping right into the heart of the Reichian tradition there.
Yeah.
He explicitly argued that cultures that are economically oppressive or authoritarian, they mold individuals. They shape us through chronic muscular and emotional rigidity, precisely so we adapt better to the existing structure.
So social control gets embodied as inhibition, like don't rock the boat, don't feel too much, just fit in.
That's the idea. It forces the body into a kind of permanent state of functional submission, you could say.
But hang on, is this purely systemic? Or is it just the general stress of modern life? Because, wealthy and powerful people carry immense tension too. How purely economic is this theory? Does their place in the hierarchy impose its own kind of armor?
That's a really important, very necessary nuance. The type of tension might differ, absolutely. But the overall system, often based on striving, competition, maintaining control, it kind of demands universal bracing. just for different reasons.
So for those higher up the ladder.
The armor might be more about protecting against vulnerability, perhaps, social exposure, fear of losing status, losing control. It's a different kind of defense. But for those lower down the hierarchy, the armor often serves a more raw defensive function against what we could call outsourced risk.
Okay, let's nail down that concept. The outsourcing of risk. What does that mean in practice?
Well, money fundamentally encodes hierarchy and power relations, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Those at the top often have mechanisms to delegate risk, to push it downwards.
Like safety nets, savings, investments, maybe better job security, things that absorb financial shocks.
Exactly. Whereas those lower down the economic ladder, often by necessity, end up absorbing a disproportionate amount of that risk. Job insecurity, debt, worries about healthcare, housing instability.
They carry the uncertainty.
They carry the uncertainty. And this is where that sociosomatic feedback loop becomes really clear and sometimes quite brutal. If you're chronically exposed to that kind of insecurity, your body's sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, it's always idling, it's constantly scanning, constantly on guard.
Because the external world never really signals deep, prolonged safety.
Right. The body can't truly fully relax into that safe ventral vagal state we'll talk about later. The environment keeps pinging potential threats.
And what does that do physiologically? This isn't just feeling anxious, right? There's a physical cost to being on guard all the time.
Absolutely. Physiologically, that sustained activation requires constant low-level muscle contraction, often leading to that shallow upper chest breathing, exactly the kind of diaphragm constriction Reich described.
Yeah.
The adrenal system keeps pumping out stress hormones like cortisol. We see measurable chronic low-level inflammation throughout the body. The gut tightens up, which can contribute to things like IBS or other digestive issues. It's the body physically tightening in vigilance, bracing against a potential unpredictable economic hit.
So the person absorbing the risk is literally carrying a greater physiological load. The mental burden of precarity manifests as a measurable physical state of defense.
Precisely. Reich's stance was pretty stark on this.
Yeah.
Economic dependence and bodily tension go hand in hand. The body becomes the site of social control. If the system keeps people compliant through economic fear, the body learns to mute impulses.
Impulses like creativity, resistance, even anger, anything that might threaten your economic survival.
Yeah, potentially. And that suppression, when it's internalized day after day, year after year, it hardens. It becomes part of that character armor.
This brings us to a really interesting, maybe speculative point about the future, the automation shift. Historically, you could argue, economic systems relied heavily on human labor, human vigilance as the main engine.
Keeping people anxious and striving kept the wheels turning, in a sense.
Right. So if automation starts reducing the need for certain kinds of human labor, physical, or even routine cognitive stuff, does that systemic pressure to keep us anxious and tense just dissipate? Will we all just relax?
Well, that's certainly the optimistic hope, isn't it? But there's a pretty strong caveat. Automation might eliminate the specific precarity of, say, an assembly line worker, but the anxiety often just seems to shift location. It finds new forms.
Like what?
We're already seeing it, aren't we? Anxiety around job displacement itself, intense competition for the remaining, often highly skilled jobs. And then there's the whole unrelenting pressure cooker of social media metrics, status performance, constant comparison.
Yeah, the body doesn't really distinguish, does it? Saber-toothed tiger, pink slip, bad performance review, not enough likes. It's all threat.
From the nervous system's perspective, pretty much. It translates perceived threats, whatever their source, into the same basic physiological responses. Fight, flight, or maybe freeze.
So the nature of the threat might change from physical exertion anxiety to status anxiety, maybe this too, but the physiological cost, that activation of chronic tension, it just carries on.
It seems to adapt. And this constant tension, ironically, might keep us more receptive, more reactive, maybe more compliant in some ways. It reinforces the very structural patterns we're trying to understand and maybe escape.
Which means to really escape the armor, we have to understand the precise biological wiring that maintains it, how it actually works under the hood. Okay, perfect transition. We've established this idea of armor as a mix of emotional defense and social adaptation. Now we need the how. How does modern science actually map this out? How does it explain why this tension gets so wired in and stays there? And so we should start with the core regulator, Polyvagal Theory.
That's right. Polyvagal Theory, developed mainly by Dr. Stephen Porges, gives us a much more detailed and nuanced map of how our autonomic nervous system, the ANS, regulates feelings of safety, responses to threat, and our capacity for social connection. It really focuses on the sophisticated role of the vagus nerve.
And it moves beyond that old simple binary, right? Just sympathetic for stress, parasympathetic for rest.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
more complex than that. A key concept Porges introduced is neuroception.
Neuroception. Okay, break that down.
Neuroception is basically our nervous system's unconscious automatic scanning process. It's constantly checking the environment, internal cues from our body, external cues like other people's facial expressions, their tone of voice for signals of safety or danger.
And this happens below conscious thought.
Way below. It's happening all the time, adjusting our physiological state before our thinking brain even registers what's going on. It's our body's ancient surveillance system for survival.
Okay. And based on what that surveillance system picks up, we shift into one of the three main polyvagal states. Let's make sure we're clear on those.
Right. So first, there's the ventral vagal state. This is the most recently evolved part of the system, evolutionarily speaking. It's associated with feeling safe, connected, socially engaged.
That's the ideal state, though.
That's the state where we feel calm, open, curious. We can connect deeply with others. Our faces are expressive. Our thinking is clear. It's the optimal state for healing, growth, learning, all the good stuff.
Okay. Then there's the one we all know.
The sympathetic state.
Yeah.
The classic fight or flight response. Absolutely necessary for survival when there's a real threat.
Yeah.
It mobilizes energy, makes us alert, tenses muscles, speeds up the heart rate. Chronic armor, as we discussed, often involves the body being stuck in a kind of low-level, constant sympathetic activation, always a little bit on.
And the third state, the oldest one.
That's the dorsal vagal state. This is the most primitive response, triggered by extreme overwhelm when fight or flight seems impossible or hasn't worked. It links to shutdown.
Like playing dead.
Essentially, yes. Numbness, dissociation, collapse, feeling frozen or heavy. That chronic stiffness or rigidity we feel as armor can sometimes be a kind of blend, maybe some sympathetic bracing mixed with a degree of dorsal freeze. The body's both hyper-alert and sort of collapsed or shut down in certain ways.
So the big takeaway from polyvagal theory for releasing tension is?
It's that we have to actively signal safety to the nervous system. We need cues, internal or external, that allow the system to shift out of sympathetic or dorsal states and back into that safe, connected ventral vagal state. That's the prerequisite for letting go of the armor.
Okay, that gives us the regulatory context. Now let's talk about the brain structures that actually coordinate and maybe crucially maintain these chronic tension patterns as habits. Porges emphasizes the brainstem, but you mentioned newer research highlighting the cerebellum. Isn't that usually just associated with motor control, like balance?
Traditionally, yes. But this is a major insight into why armor becomes so persistent, so structural. While the cerebellum is definitely the master coordinator for movement and balance, research now clearly shows it's deeply involved in emotional regulation too. And it helps fine-tune our autonomic responses, things like heart rate, breathing rhythm.
How does that connect to tension habits?
Think of the cerebellum as the part of the brain that turns conscious intentions or repeated reactions into smooth automatic motor patterns. Like learning to ride a bike or type or tie your shoes. You don't think about the individual muscle movements anymore, right?
Right, it becomes automatic.
Exactly. So if you habitually tense your shoulders every single time you sit down at your computer or every time your phone rings with a stressful call, that's a small sympathetic response. The cerebellum learns that pattern. It encodes that shoulder tension, that jaw clench, that shallow breath as part of a normal, coordinated motor program associated with that situation.
Wow, so it explains why the tension feels so automatic, so habitual. It's not just a reflex from the brainstem, it's a learned motor program coordinated by the cerebellum.
Precisely. It exists almost independently of the original emotional trigger after a while, which means releasing the armor isn't just about telling the muscle to relax. You have to actually retrain that cerebellar program, often through conscious, mindful, perhaps novel kinds of movement.
Okay, that's huge. Cerebellum as the habit holder. What about internal rhythms, specifically the heart? We've got the brainstem, the cerebellum. How does the heart fit into this wiring of chronic tension?
The heart is way more than just a pump. We now know it has its own complex intrinsic nervous system. Sometimes people call it the heart brain or little brain in the heart. It's got about 40,000 neurons.
Seriously, that many?
Yeah, it's quite sophisticated. And this heart brain actively communicates back and forth with the brainstem and the limbic system, the emotional centers of the brain. It's a constant dialogue.
And we can measure the quality of that dialogue.
We can, through something called heart rate variability, or HRV.
Okay, explain HRV simply. What is it measuring?
HRV isn't measuring your heart rate, like beats per minute. It's measuring the tiny natural variations in the time intervals between consecutive heartbeats.
And why is variability good? Wouldn't a steady rhythm be better?
You'd think so, but actually, high variability, a lot of subtle fluctuation in those intervals, signifies a healthy, resilient, responsive nervous system. It means your heart can quickly speed up or slow down based on signals from the vagus nerve. It shows the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems are in a flexible, dynamic balance.
And low HRV.
Low HRV is associated with stress, rigidity, inflammation, and generally poor nervous system resilience. The system is kind of stuck, less adaptable.
And you mentioned the vagus nerve. The ventral vagal branch connects the heart directly to the brain.
Yes, there's a direct, powerful connection, which means the rhythm and coherence of your heart is sending constant messages back to your brain about your state of safety or threat.
So practices that promote heart coherence, like slow, rhythmic breathing, maybe feeling gratitude, they actually influence this heart-brain communication.
Absolutely. They send a clear biological signal of safety up to the brainstem and higher brain centers. It helps shift the whole system towards that ventral vagal state.
It creates a kind of upward spiral.
Exactly. A coherent heart rhythm signals safety. Feeling safe allows the body to begin relaxing chronic tension. Reduced tension improves breathing patterns. Better breathing reinforces heart coherence. You build positive momentum.
Okay, we have the regulation, polyvagal, the habit holder, cerebellum, the internal rhythm, heart. Now, let's ground this. What's the actual physical stuff that holds the tension? You mentioned fascia earlier.
Yes, fascia. This incredible web of connective tissue that runs everywhere in the body, wrapping muscles, organs, bones, nerves. It's all interconnected. For a long time, it was just seen as packing material.
But it's much more than that.
Oh, vastly more. It's now understood as a dynamic sensory organ in its own right, and it seems to be the primary biological substrate for Reich's character armor.
Why is it so good at, well, storing stress?
Because fascia is incredibly rich in nerve endings. It's packed with mechanoreceptors, sensors for pressure, stretch, vibration, and proprioceptors, which tell your brain where your body parts are in space. It's constantly sending information back to your nervous system.
Okay.
And when we maintain chronic muscular holding patterns because of stress or trauma, the fascia adapts physiologically. It can become densified, dehydrated, stickier, less pliable. This physically restricts movement in that area.
And reinforces the armor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It provides the physical scaffolding for the muscular holding. The densified fascia limits your range of motion, and then it sends sensory feedback back to the nervous system and the cerebellum, essentially saying, see? This restricted movement is normal now. Keep bracing.
It becomes a vicious cycle. The emotional holding leads to muscle tension, which leads to fascial changes, which then signals back to the brain to maintain the tension.
You've got it. The fascia is like the physical memory bank. It takes the instruction brace, hold, contract, and helps solidify that pattern in the structure. So to truly release chronic tension, we need to address the fascia physically while also retraining the nervous system's perception of safety.
Okay, we have built this really comprehensive map. We see the structural roots in Reich's armor, the social and economic pressures, the emotional holding, the neurological wiring through polyvagal states and the cerebellum, and the physical substrate in the fascia. It's complex.
It really is. All these layers interact.
Which explains the deep problem we started with. Why surface-level stuff often doesn't create lasting change. Stretching, maybe some simple yoga, even massage. It feels good temporarily, but because it doesn't address this whole interconnected structure.
The tension just creeps back in.
Yep.
The underlying emotional patterns, the nervous system habits, the fascial restrictions, they haven't fundamentally shifted. The default setting reasserts itself.
So how do we move beyond that, from just noticing the tension or getting temporary relief to actual structural reprogramming?
The key shift, I think, is moving from passive observation, just noticing, oh, I'm tense again, to a more active, interactive form of somatic inquiry.
Somatic inquiry, meaning asking questions of the body.
Essentially, yes. Treating the tension not as an enemy to be banished, but as valuable, informative data. It's telling you something about what emotional program, what social pressure, maybe even what inherited pattern is currently running in your system.
Okay, so how do we do that? Is there a framework?
We can outline a kind of four-part framework for what we might call proactive somatic mindfulness. It integrates these different layers we've discussed.
Right, step one, where do we start? Given the polyvagal piece, it has to be about safety, right?
Absolutely. One, settling and signaling safety. This is pure polyvagal application. Before you even try to work on the tension, your nervous system needs to be calm enough that exploring it doesn't just make you brace more.
How do we signal safety internally?
The most direct way is through the breath. Specifically, emphasizing a slow, intentional, and extended exhalation. Longer exhales are a powerful ancient biological signal to the brainstem and the vagus nerve that says, okay, the immediate threat has passed. You can downshift.
So breathe out longer than you breathe in, gently?
Gently, exactly. No forcing. And we couple that with finding a body posture that feels supported, gentle, not rigid or defensive, creating a safe container within yourself before you start poking at the sensitive spots.
Okay, makes sense. Create the safe base first. Then what?
Then we engage the mind, bringing in that Reichian or Jungian layer. 2, body scan with inquiry. This is where we gently scan the body, locate areas of tension, and then begin asking non-judgmental questions.
Interrogating the tension, but kindly.
Kindly is the key word, not demanding answers, but inviting insight. You find the tightness, say, in your jaw or your chest or your gut, and you ask things like, what might I be holding back right now? Is there a thought, a feeling, a social pressure that seems connected to this tightening? When did I first notice this?
Can you give an example?
Sure. Maybe you notice tension in your throat. The inquiry might lead you to connect it with a fear of speaking your truth in a difficult conversation you need to have. Or tightness in your abdomen might bring up feelings related to money worries, that fear of scarcity we talked about.
So the goal is to link the physical sensation to the underlying narrative or trigger.
Yes, to bring the subconscious pattern into conscious awareness.
Okay, critical step. Let's say I do that. I find my shoulder tension flares up whenever I think about needing to prove my worth at work. What's next? Do I just try harder to relax the shoulder muscle now that I know?
Probably not directly, because just forcing relaxation often triggers a rebound tensing. This is where we need to engage the fascia and the cerebellum. Step 3, micro-movement and fascial exploration. This borrows from approaches like Feldenkrais or Rolfing.
Micro-movement, so not big stretches.
Often, no. Instead, we introduce very small, gentle, perhaps unusual movements in the area of attention, and crucially, we coordinate these tiny movements very closely with the breath.
Like incredibly subtle shoulder rolls, or tiny little exploratory wiggles in the jaw. Why small and gentle?
2 main reasons. First, fascia responds better to slow, gentle, sustained input. Trying to force it or stretch it aggressively often makes it contract defensively. Second, these novel micro-movements send new information to the cerebellum.
Disrupting the old habit loop.
Exactly. You're gently exploring the edges of the pattern. You're teaching the nervous system through embodied experience that a slightly different way of holding a wider range of sensation or motion in that area is now safe. It's like saying, see, you can move this way without threat. It helps dissolve fascial adhesions and retrains the cerebellar program simultaneously. It's really an act of building trust with your own body.
Okay, safety, inquiry, micro-movement. What's the final piece?
Closing the loop with the mind. 4, mental reframing and feedback. As the body begins to release, we consciously work with the beliefs or thoughts that were associated with the tension.
So back to the shoulder tension example. If it was linked to needing to prove my worth.
As you feel the shoulder soften through the micro movements and breath, you might consciously affirm a different belief. Something like, my intrinsic value isn't tied to constant striving. I can be competent and feel safe without bracing myself all the time.
So you align the cognitive pattern with the somatic shift.
Yes, it helps ensure that the newly available somatic state, the released tension, doesn't immediately get pulled back into the old stressful thought pattern. You're reinforcing the change at multiple levels. This whole 4-step process aims to leverage neuroplasticity using conscious attention plus movement plus breath plus belief to actively retrain those deeply ingrained stress responses in the nervous system and the fascia.
We've covered a lot of ground: personal history, social pressures, the neurofascial mechanics. But let's go even deeper now. Is this character armor always just about our own personal biography and the society we live in? Or could we be dealing with tensions that are somehow passed down? We need to touch on inherited tension and the science of epigenetics.
Yes, we really must acknowledge this layer. It's becoming increasingly clear that some chronic tension patterns, some aspects of our baseline nervous system sensitivity, might actually reflect generational stress and trauma.
Through epigenetics, how does that work?
Well, epigenetics is the study of changes in gene expression that don't involve alterations to the underlying DNA sequence itself. What research is showing is that significant stress or trauma experienced by, say, your parents or grandparents can cause these epigenetic modifications.
Modifications to what?
Often to genes involved in stress hormone regulation, how your body produces in response to cortisol, for instance. These epigenetic marks can sometimes be passed down to the next generation, leading to altered stress responses in the offspring, even if they haven't experienced the same trauma.
So if a previous generation lived through something extreme, like chronic famine or war or persecution, their bodies adapted to be hypervigilant for survival. And that heightened sensitivity, that tendency towards bracing, can be physically inherited.
That's the implication, yes.
Yeah.
The classic, though controversial animal studies really highlighted this. You probably know the one with the mice trained to fear a specific smell, like cherry blossoms, because it was paired with an electric shock.
Right. And the fear was passed on?
Astonishingly, yes. The subsequent generations of mice, who had never experienced the shock themselves, still showed heightened fear responses, physiologically measurable stress when exposed to just the smell of cherry blossoms. Their nervous systems were essentially pre-tuned, pre-sensitized to that specific trigger because of their ancestors' experience.
Wow. That really puts a different spin on things. It could explain why some of our chronic tension or hypervigilance feels almost ancestral, like a vague but powerful sense of unease or threat that doesn't quite seem to match our current life circumstances.
Exactly. Our baseline stress threshold might be set a bit lower or tuned to specific sensitivities due to inherited programming. And then, of course, that gets layered with the patterns we learn from our families about how to express or suppress emotion, how to cope with stress. It's nature and nurture interacting at a very deep level.
This deep structural perspective makes me think of some of the, well, more ancient wisdom traditions or perhaps early pioneers who sensed these patterns before we had the science. People like Gurdjieff or Jung.
Absolutely. Their work resonates strongly here. Gurdjieff, for instance, clearly recognized bodily tension not just as bad, but as stored energy, as a kind of mechanical habit that locks us into automatic reactions and blocks the conscious flow between what he called the three centers, head, heart, and body.
And his complex movement exercises, the Gurdjieff movements.
They were designed precisely to disrupt that automaticity, to shake up the habitual tension patterns, forcing awareness and integration, making consciousness flow more freely between those centers.
And Jung, coming from depth psychology.
Jung saw body tension and posture as direct physical expressions of unconscious complexes, those knots of unresolved psychological energy. Chronic tension wasn't random. It was the body trying to contain or manage unintegrated parts of the psyche, conflicting energies. So for Jung, becoming aware of these bodily states, these tensions, was absolutely essential for psychological integration, for wholeness.
So whether it's personal, social, or maybe even inherited, we're dealing with deep, complex structures. Which brings us to maybe the ultimate hurdle when we try to apply these practices, when we try to dive this deep. We often hit a wall of just confusion.
Ah, yes.
Confusion. You know, you sit down to do the inquiry, you ask, what am I holding back here in my chest? And the answer isn't a clear anger or fear. It's just this murky, chaotic swirl. It feels like nothing specific, just confusion.
And that is perhaps the most critical insight for truly deep reprogramming. Our minds hate confusion. Evolutionarily speaking, confusion is uncomfortable, even dangerous.
Why, Daniel?
Because it doesn't immediately suggest a clear action. Fear says run or freeze. Anger says fight. These lead to action. Confusion often leads nowhere initially. It paralyzes decision-making. For survival, that was risky. So our default reflex is to get out of confusion as fast as possible.
When do we do that?
Usually by quickly converting it into something more familiar and actionable, like anxiety or frustration, or by just shutting down the inquiry altogether, dismissing it. Oh, this isn't working. I don't know what I'm feeling.
But you're saying we should interrupt that reflex. Instead of trying to solve the confusion or immediately label it as anxiety, we should stay with it.
Exactly. What if we didn't treat confusion as a problem to be solved, but as incredibly valuable input? What if confusion is actually the signal that we're touching a genuinely deep, complex, multi-layered structural pattern? Maybe one that involves those inherited pieces or deeply contradictory social conditionings.
So the proactive practice isn't about getting rid of the confusion.
No, it's about using the confusion itself as a tool. We mindfully observe how the confusion feels in the body. Where does it seem to reside? Is it a tightness in the head, a buzzing in the chest, a churning in the stomach? Does it have a particular emotional flavor underneath the chaos?
So by mindfully locating the sensation of confusion in the body, we're sort of anchoring it. We're using the physical feeling to bypass the mind's frantic need to resolve it immediately.
Precisely. You're holding a non-judgmental space for that structural complexity to simply be, without needing to instantly fix it or label it. You're observing the pattern at its deepest level. And paradoxically, holding that confused space with mindful presence often creates the very conditions needed for the most profound and lasting release. It allows the nerve system to find its own way towards reorganization, bypassing the habitual reactive loops. #tag to our outro. So when we pull all these threads together, we really have completed a kind of map, haven't we? We started with chronic character armor, Reich's foundational idea. We saw how it's maintained, even reinforced by pervasive systemic social pressures, hierarchy, outsourced economic risk.
Right. And then we layered on the modern understanding. How this tension is physiologically wired and maintained through our nervous system states the polyvagal framework and through cerebellar habits, the heart's rhythms, and physically held in the fascial network.
And acknowledging that some of this sensitivity, some of these patterns, might even be amplified by inherited epigenetic factors, is a truly integrated system.
Which means the ultimate goal here, the real takeaway, it's something more ambitious than just, relaxing a bit more often. It feels like it's about achieving what you might call regulatory sovereignty.
Ooh, I like that term. Regulatory sovereignty, reclaiming your nervous system, fundamentally, from being constantly hijacked by chronic social pressures or these deep inherited activations.
Yeah, and the path there seems to be through this proactive somatic mindfulness, systematically applying these steps, signaling safety, inquiring into the tension, using micro-movement, reframing beliefs, and crucially, learning to work with confusion as valuable data.
You're essentially consciously transforming the fundamental architecture of your own body-mind system. You're systematically dissolving the old structure, layer by complex layer. You're teaching your body deeply that it is genuinely safe now to stop bracing, stop striving, stop holding the unnecessary weight of the world, whether that burden feels historical, social, or ancestral.
It's profound work. And it leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry forward. If Reich was even partly right, if society in some ways benefits from or even relies on our collective low-level hum of anxiety, striving, and tension, what kind of massive societal shifts, political, economic, cultural, might start to emerge if a critical mass of individuals actually learned how to genuinely, structurally let go of that collective armor? If we reclaimed that biological core he talked about.
The shift in energy, focus, priorities. Maybe even power dynamics. It would be immense, wouldn't it? Something to ponder.
Definitely something to ponder.
Well, thank you for allowing us to guide you through this particular deep dive. It's been fascinating to explore.
Agreed. And we look forward to exploring the next layer of complexity with you all again soon.